Martin. He's usually late. I guess you've been at a TV appearance.
Sorry, everybody.
Not as much as we are. Now, Dorothy Parker, you're just not that shy. Well, let's get our program underway now. Our first performer is Dorothy. Attempt to moderate form between Dorothy Parker, Mark Twain, and Will Rogers. It was a 90 minutes I will never forget. She had and does have, as she returns from the past, style, acid wit, and sharp perception, and has been recognized as one of America's greatest critics, poets, and short story writers of the second quarter of the 20th century, and she loves to read her poems. Would you join me in welcoming Dorothy Parker?
Men seldom make passes at girls who wear glasses. If it is true, then glasses are a must for the sophisticated social skills of all New Yorkers. When the local town bar comes into the speakeasy trying to be funny, we simply put on our glasses. Presto, problem solved. Some still haven't decided if that couplet is funny or tragic. Is it a quip used to make fun of the maiden wearing glasses? Or is it to point out the shallowness of men? Well, I know what I was thinking when I made that remark. Oh, and lots of remarks I've made. You don't become a famous conversationalist in the roaring 20s and write for Vogue and Vanity Fair without speaking your mind. Of course, there is a prerequisite. You must first have a mind. I assume that acting has its prerequisites, the ability to portray emotion on the stage. Have you seen the latest play in New York? Beautiful Katharine Hepburn. Doesn't she do a splendid job of running the gamut of emotions from A to B? I guess it's writing reviews for such drone productions that made me look forward to many liquid luncheons at the Algonquin Motel in Manhattan, with the other staff writers, of course. And stimulating conversation always leads to long, liquid luncheons. There are those who were fond of calling our little group the Algonquin Round Table. I don't really recall that the tables were round, but they had the best Johnny Walker Scotch whiskey in town. Well, in a time between world wars, even prohibition couldn't halt women from making the roaring 20s exhilarating. Can you imagine I was only 27 years old in 1920 when the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote? We had previously granted that right to black men with the 15th. Wow, such liberation. And of course, there are those who still have trouble distinguishing between a liberated woman and a woman of ill repute. The difference is education. Now, Yale is a good institution, wouldn't you agree? Take the Yale prom, for example. If all the girls in attendance were laid end to end, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, I wouldn't know anything of proms. Being a good Jewish girl, I was educated at the Blessed Sacrament Academy by the Sisters of Charity, which explains why for therapy I went to finishing school in New Jersey. Jew, raised Catholic, educated Catholic equals therapy. After therapy, of course, I was on the writing staff of the New Yorker in the early days. Have any of you ever worked for an institution that had financial difficulties? Oh, Harold, he would try so hard to keep the magazine running in those early days, and every once in a while would show compassion. He would often rush up to me and say, "Dorothy, what happened? Why didn't you come in to work this week?" I would retort, "Well, somebody was using the pencil." You can only imagine what we were paid in those days. Salary is no object, I'd say. I only need enough to keep body and soul apart. I'm not too sure we liberated women did that. I know a woman who can speak 18 languages. and she can't say no in any of them. Oh, who am I to speak? I like to have a martini, 2 at the very most. After 3, I'm under the table, and after 4, I'm under my host. Which probably explains my 2 marriages and 4 attempted suicides. You know, the finishing school in New Jersey should have covered those chapters better. Marriage, suicide, marriage, suicide. Oh well, men can't be blamed. After all, they are rhinestones in the rough. Can't live with them, can't live without them. And all that really means is that no one wants to be lonely. Of course, New York has no lonely women, no single women, no divorced women, no widowed women. Have you read my story, Big Blonde? Well, you must. It explains the lives of the lonely. Speaking of loneliness, which is lots of empty space, void, all around us, a gap between humans, I'm really glad that you brought me here today. I needed to see how my short story written during the Civil Rights Movement touched your spirit. Arrangement in black and white. Humans have come a long way. Too bad it took so long, though, to see past looks, to see past accomplishments, to see past gender, to see past color. I only have one thing to say. No resting on your laurels. You got a lot of work to still do. If I had any decency, I wouldn't have lived to be 76. Everyone knows I tried not to. After all, I wrote 2 epitaphs. How many have you written? I guess I'm most proud of my ashes. They finally ended up in the Dorothy Parker Memorial Garden. I won't even tell you where all they went before they got there. At the NAACP headquarters, Baltimore. Would you like to hear what it really says? Here lie the ashes of Dorothy Parker, humorist, writer, critic, defender of human rights. This memorial garden is dedicated to her noble spirit, which celebrated the oneness of humankind and to the bonds of everlasting friendship between the black and the Jewish people. I think I prefer my own epitaphs. The first one is a tribute to liberated women's house cleaning days. Excuse my dust. The other one is in fond memory of my days at the speakeasies and my time with you. This is on me. Thank you.
You will hear more from Dorothy Parker a little later with the questioning period. Our second guest from the past is Oscar Wilde. He lived from 1854 to 1900. He was a famous playwright and lecturer with a keen wit and social observations. Would you join me in welcoming to our forum Oscar Wilde?
Good evening, and I thank you for the opportunity to address you. As the author of many comedic plays, I sincerely hope that no journalists or critics are in attendance. In old days, men had the rack. Today, they have the press. Of course, there is one thing worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. If any journalists or critics be here, I please ask that you promise to disagree with me in tomorrow's papers. For I always found that when people agree with me, I felt I must be wrong. I will begin by telling you that I am having the most painfully exquisite life. I have a lovely wife, 2 beautiful sons, and my most recent play, The Importance of Being Earnest, has recently opened in the Grand St. James Theatre in London. And my first play, Lady Windermere's Fan, just closed to semi-positive reviews and entirely positive ticket sales. And now here I am with you entirely lovely people in this semi-lovely country. The first thing I notice, though, is that everyone seems to be in a hurry to catch a train, a state of things which is not favorable to poetry or romance. But this is not my first visit to the colonies. About 15 years ago, in 1881, I toured America lecturing on aesthetics. In those travels, I had the pleasure to meet many of your great Eastern thinkers, a Mr. Walt Whitman, Mr. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and Mr. Oliver Wendell Holmes. And now I have had the pleasure of making Mr. Twain's acquaintance. But it was my visit to your West that I treasure most. The people in Chicago advised me to erase the West from my itinerary because they shoot everyone there. But I arrived, I read some works by Cellini, and they named a silver mine after me, though I have not seen 1 shilling of royalties for the use of my name. And it was there that I discovered, in a dancing saloon, the only rational method of art criticism I have ever come across in my entire life. A sign above a piano that read, "Please don't shoot the pianist, he's doing his best." Then the miners invited me to descend in a rickety metal bucket into the very purgatorial depths of their mountain to have supper. The first course being whiskey, the second, whiskey, and the third being whiskey. Of course, I found that entirely pleasurable because alcohol taken in sufficient quantities will produce the benefits of drunkenness. In the Rocky Mountains, however, I found the knowledge of art so infinitesimal that an art patron once sued the railroad when his plaster cast of Venus de Milo arrived from Paris minus the arms. What is more surprising, he won his case and the railroad paid the damages. A most educated country. Well, I suppose I should tell you some more about myself. I was born in Dublin in 1854 after my brother Willie and my sister Isola. I started out in life as Oscar Finnegal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde. You see, when one is unknown, a number of Christian names are useful. But as one becomes more famous, one sheds them. All but 2 of my names have been thrown overboard. And soon I shall discard another and be known simply as the Oscar or the Wilde. My mother was a prolific poet, a skilled translator of many languages, and known as much for her entertaining fellow socialites as for her literary skills. My father was a scientist, an adventurer, and the most renowned eye surgeon in the British Kingdom. He was actually knighted by the Queen of England and the King of Sweden for his services. My preparatory school awarded me a scholarship to Trinity College in Dublin, where my top marks in the classics, drawing, and Greek earned me another scholarship to Oxford. But I must remind you that even though education is an admirable thing, nothing truly worth knowing can be taught. My classmates agreed with me on that matter and would often exchange ideas at my home during one of my mother's infamously successful afternoon teas. One lad named Bram Stoker was always coaxing my father to tell him more tales of his Egyptian travels, complete with ancient curses and evil mummies. Another gentleman, a few years younger than us, enjoyed challenging our skills of logic and deductive reasoning. I believe his name was Arthur C. Doyle. After graduation, I toured Italy with some lads from school who were infatuated with converting to the fashionable Catholicism. They thought a trip to Italy would prove something to me, and that I would join in their conversion. But I believe religions die when they are proved true. In fact, science is the record of our dead religions. I believe it is the confession, not the Catholic priest, that gives us absolution. But I'll believe anything, provided it is incredible. That's why I intend to die a Catholic, though I could never live as one. Upon returning from Italy, I embarked on a lecture tour of America, 140 stops in 260 days, from New York to San Francisco, all by train. The topic was, as I said, aesthetics, to which I have devoted my life, art for art's sake. And for me, the art in question was writing humorous plays about serious topics and serious essays about humorous topics. The ancient Greeks learned this early and actually lived their art every day. They remain a utopian model for our modern world. Art is the only serious thing in the world, and the artist is the only person who is never serious. Art should guide our lives. One should either be a work of art or wear a work of art. And I try to live my life to the fullest expression of this ideal. Moderation is a fatal thing. Nothing succeeds like excess. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I can resist everything except temptation. Pleasure is the only thing to live for. Nothing ages like happiness. As soon as we worry too much and become too serious, we become unbeautiful. Professions. Hideous they are. Except, of course, in the church. But in the church they don't think. A bishop says at age 80 what he was taught to say at age 20, and as a natural consequence, remains entirely delightful. But enough about art. After my American tour, I returned to London and married my beautiful Constance. We have 2 lovely sons, Cyril and Vivian, and the marriage my mother always wanted for me. But marriage has taught me a few things. I have learned that men marry because they are tired, and women marry because they are curious. Both are disappointed. And I've learned that to have the reputation of possessing the most perfect social tact, talk to every woman as if you loved her, and every man as if he bores you. Well, I see our time together is expiring. Your appreciation of my words has been most intelligent. I am led to believe that you enjoyed them as much as I. Now, my diary and I must board a train for New York. I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read on a train. Before I leave, though, I must tell you something serious about the soul and body in this search for the human spirit. To be successfully medieval, one should have no body. They were very serious about the soul. To be successfully modern, one should have no soul. Everything is about the body. To be successfully Greek, one should have no clothes. Thank you.
It's nice to be correct in your predictions. It's a funny evening, isn't it? Our third guest, who is still alive, is Steve Martin, who was born in 1945 and is still with us, too. I promise you, I didn't do that. Right, Tyler? Steve Martin, who was born in 1945, is a modern-day TV and movie comedian. You've all seen him, but he's here again for another performance. Help me welcome Steve Martin.
Hello, I am Steve Martin. A lot of magazines and journalists these days have been referring to me as the elder statesman of comedy. Now, I'm not so sure if elder can really be used to describe me just yet. I'm only 55. I still have my natural hair color. So I was feeling pretty old, and I decided to come on up here to North Idaho, do the popcorn forum, because I'm the youngest guy here. Of course, as Tony said, everybody else except the Dalai Lama is dead. That's kind of weird, isn't it? To be on a guest list, and the only other person alive besides you is the Dalai Lama? Sounds like a bad Grisham novel. A Time to Meditate. I can see the movie now. Well, anyways, Tony said that in order to get my free meal, I'd have to get up here and tell a little bit about my life, you know. I find that kind of hard to do. I'm a pretty modest guy, really, altogether. I don't know if I can just get up here and go on and on about how I'm one of the greatest comedians in the world. And, oh, who am I kidding? That's my favorite thing to do. Okay, let's see. Where do we begin? I was born in Waco, Texas. I only lived there till I was about 5, but everybody in that town was really keen on me. They're always saying good things about me. But then you look at their only other celebrity. I think compared to David Koresh, if Gallagher was their only other celebrity, they'd praise him as the highest comedian ever to live. So after we got out of Waco, we moved to California. Lived in Inglewood for a while. Eventually we moved on down to Garden Grove in Orange County. Lived right next to Disneyland, actually, so I got a job there selling guidebooks. I saw that I found out that I could sell quite a few more guidebooks if I did a little shtick with the sales pitch, you know. So I started coming with some magic tricks. I was a lot better at it, but it's been a long time since I did that stuff, you know. Tied some balloon animals, did the little song and dance. Oh no, I've got happy feet! Suckers fell for that one all the time. So that was a great time in my life. It was where I really started to love entertainment. I loved comedy. I loved twisting things to give it a laugh. Now, my father didn't agree with me. He was a staunch Republican, successful real estate broker. He didn't understand my drive to be a comedian. So, much to his delight, I enrolled in Long Beach State University in the 60s. Much to his dismay, I enrolled in philosophy. So I was at a very crucial juncture in my life. I knew that I either wanted to be a professor of philosophy or a comedian. Of course I chose comedian because you don't have to justify that. So, oh yeah. So I dropped out of college. Started writing full-time for TV. I won an Emmy in '69 for outstanding writing on the Smothers Brothers. And that was really the start of my career, really. I started doing a lot more stand-up through the early 70s. And by 75, I had made several appearances on Johnny Carson and a little show that was just starting up, known as Saturday Night Live. After that, it just really went up, and I was on my way to celebrity. Yes. The awards started pouring in. I got a Grammy in '77 for Let's Get Small, and again in '79 for Wild and Crazy Guy. I was up for an Academy Award in '78 for The Absent-Minded Waiter. I was just happy to be nominated. So, as much as I appreciate stand-up for launching my career into celebrity, I hate it. I really do hate it. I mean, you're traveling all of the time, you never get any breaks, and then when you're doing your show, there'll be some drunk guy in the front row. You kill me, Steve. Thanks for not doing that this time, Tony.
This is only white wine. I haven't had enough yet.
So let's see. So I might be thanking him a little too early. I don't know. Okay, can't hide it under there. Okay. Anyway, since '81, I've been putting out about a movie a year. I admit they They haven't all been great. If you haven't seen Mixed Nuts, don't. But I have produced a lot of gems that I really appreciate, that I really enjoy still these days. Little Shop of Horror, Roxanne, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and more recently, Bowfinger. I directed that one too, actually. Thank you. Let's see. Just got done hosting the Academy Awards. Haven't got one myself yet, but I'm not bitter. And in the future, later this year, I'm coming out with a movie called Novocaine, in which I play a dentist. And it's not just a reprisal from Little Shop of Horrors, I assure you. And I'm also executive producing a new show that will be coming out on NBC called The Downer Channel. And I guess to wrap this up, I think that the most important key to my success is being unique and is being an individual. It's not be afraid to let what you feel show. It's very important. So I want you all to take the nonconformist oath with me. Would you do that? Would you guys all take that with me? All right. Great. Here we go. All right. I promise to be unique. I swear I will never repeat things that other people say. Good night, everybody.
I can't introduce who he really is yet, but I can't resist one thing. He's in one of my classes. And it's very easy to teach that class because he never says a word in class. You have to get him on stage before he opens up. He just sits there and grins through the lecture. I don't know what that means. Isn't this great? Another treat for you tonight was that remarkable man, one of America's greatest humorists and writers. Everyone has heard of him and his works, and he lived from 1835 to 1910. Join me in welcoming to our program Mark Twain.
Thank you. I want to read the question that everybody's been thinking about here all week. How can we use the stories, writings, and works of the great historical characters to better understand the significance and purpose of the human spirit? Well, I'm a writer, and once in England I was called a great writer, but I was sorry to hear my name listed with the great writers. Well, you know, they have a habit of dying off. Well, Chaucer's dead, so is Spencer, so is Milton, and so is Shakespeare. And I'm not feeling too well myself tonight. But I don't know how you're going to answer that question, how you learn from the works of great writers and others. But I thought maybe you would find it amusing if I told you what I learned from my books. For example, that first book about the jumping frog of Calaveras County, it appeared in the last issue of Henry Clapp's Dian magazine, Saturday Press. It was the most joyful part of the obsequies. And it was immediately reprinted all over America and England. And so I gathered some other pieces and put them together with the jumping frog. And by appointment that somebody made for me, I went to visit George Carleton, the publisher, offer him my book. And he said, well, what can I do for you? And I reminded him I had the appointment. He says, well, So I offered him my book for publication, and he said, "Look at those shelves, just full of books waiting to be published. Do I want another? No, sir. Good day." Well, it was 21 years before I saw Carlson again. I was sojourning with my family at the Schweizerhof in Lucerne, and he came up to me and immediately said, "I am essentially an obscure man, but I have one claim to fame that qualifies me for great distinction." He said, "I once refused a book of yours, and for this I stand as the prize ass of the 19th century." Well, it was a handsome apology and sweeter than any revenge that could be imagined. And so I told him that in the intervening 21 years, I had, in fancy, taken his life every year in increasingly cruel and inhumane ways. But that now I was wholly pacified and would take him as a true and valued friend and never kill him again. Well, you see, revenge is a sweet thing, even if you have to wait 21 years for it. It is wicked, and it is unchristian, and it is wholly unbecoming. But it is nonetheless a sweet thing. Come. I also learned that from another book. This wasn't one that I wrote, but one that I read. I knew a neighbor and friend of mine had this book, and so I went to his house one day and asked him if I could read it. And he said, yes, but you must read it in my house. And so I did. I read the book there. Not long after that, the summer after that, he came over to my house one day and he asked if he could borrow my lawnmower. He said his was broken. And I said, "Why, sure, but you have to use it in my yard." That was another sweet moment, you see. I learned a lesson from another book of mine. It was my first novel. One night after dinner in the Nook Farm there, we had some guests over, and afterwards, the Warners, who were the guests, and Livy and I were in the parlor, and the women were talking about the books that they were reading, and the gentlemen made fun of them. And our wives said, "Well, the thing for you to do is to write a better book for Americans to read." So we took the challenge right away. Neither one of us had ever written a work of fiction before, so we called it our novel experiment. At least Warner was the author of that joke. And we produced The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, in about 8 weeks. We wrote 600 pages. We read them in the evening to our wives. They made fun of them, but they kept coming back night after night to see what happened. The whole book can be summarized in one phrase that everyone immediately recognizes from a speculator in lands and mines. He said, "Beautiful credit. It is the foundation of modern society. Why, 2 years ago, I didn't have a dime, and now I owe $2 million. Now, this is the Gilded Age. Well, of course, we sent our first copy to William Dean Howells. I never let any of my books go out to the press until after Howells has had a chance to review it in his magazine. the Atlantic Monthly. I know that he will always find a true merit in a book. And no critic after Howells would dare find anything in a book that Howells hadn't found there. No critic has the courage on his own to criticize a book. But in the case of The Gilded Age, I made an exception to my policy, and I allowed the editor of the Daily Graphic to have a copy of the proofs, after he had given me his word of honor that his review would not appear in the Daily Graphic until after Howells's had appeared in the Atlantic Monthly. That reptile published a review 3 days later. But I can't blame him. You know? I should have required something substantial of him and not just his word of honor. And what I learned was this, that it is the will of God that we must have critics and missionaries and congressmen and humorists, and we just must bear the burden, that's all. And then Huckleberry Finn. I like that book. I don't care whether anybody else does or not. But what I learned was the value of certain critics because it was not reviewed very often or very well until it was banned from the Concord Public Library. Those moral icebergs said it was rough, coarse, and inelegant and unfit for our moral lads and lasses. And that puff went into every newspaper in the country. I said, that'll sell 25,000 copies for sure. But I was wrong. Sold 40,000 copies by March and 52,000 copies by April. And now, I have a letter recently from a defender of Huck from the Brooklyn Public Library, where the book has been banned from the children's room. And a librarian wanted to know what I thought of that. I thought, well, it was a mistake to be in the children's room in the first place. I still hold it against those lax custodians of my adolescent mind that let me read an unexpurgated Bible through by the time I was 14. Nobody can do that and draw a sweet, clean breath again. So I think that judgment to move the book out of the way of children was a wise one. You know, a child here, there, and yonder will read Huckleberry Finn, but there'll be plenty of children in heaven without these. It's only when they get to stirring things up that Huck can go through all the nurseries, and then he does prodigious harm. Well, you see, whatever readers learn from books of great authors often learn different things, behind the scenes, this sort of things. And I hope that contributes to your understanding of the human spirit. I've never understood it myself.
I'm sure you can hardly wait for the questions. But as I said to you at the beginning of the program, on your program they'll say something about an NIC special feature, magical comedy through the lens of a camera. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Mike Jones and Karen Tennyson both wrote a script and Mike taped it, and there's 3 scenes that you're going to see. The first one is in the Student Union at the main entrance. And there'll be a table of food. And Bill Rutherford, you're right there, Bill, prepared this food. And it was proposing maybe a new menu. And it is really bad. It is full of salt. He just poured salt in it. And the funniest thing about it is the end result is not as predicted. People liked it, particularly the faculty. And one person said something to the effect, "It's really good, maybe just a little less salt." But the main character in this scene is her name is Mary. Mary is the only person that I really think has a good taste for food. The second scene is with the men's basketball team. Upon returning from the regionals, the coach got them together, along with assistant coaches, and convinced them that they need to be more agile in going up and down the court. So he's, in a serious way, convinced them that they should start taking instructions from the ballet instructor at North Idaho College. And they are doing ballet on this scene, until the end when they're told it's a joke. There is a main character in that scene. You'll see him, he's in white shorts, real long shorts. And if I had a basketball team, I'd want him on. He is working harder than anybody else in what the coach wanted him to do. And then the third scene is back in the student union. And one of our students, by the name of Josh, goes among the tables, and he's lost the button on the top of his pants. And he has only 5 minutes to get to a meeting, and he's trying to convince someone in the student union to sew on the button. Those are the three scenes, and Tyler, we're now ready. He's going to turn the lights down, and he will run this for you. And it's on this screen over here.
It's still the same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Come on, Doug, try some free food. Okay. Did the Asian peanut sandwich? Yep.
Yeah, I think this is tiny bit. Okay. Okay. Did you try all three? I didn't try the.
You don't like it, dude?
I'll choke it down though. Dozen three.
Good deal. Thank you.
Spicy?
Spicy. From what I've heard, yeah, it is a little bit spicy.
Yes. You want to try here?
There's some water right here if you'd like.
Let's go water here. Yeah. All right. You don't have time? Okay. Okay. All right. Water. All right.
What's up, dude?
This is.
You want to try some food grab? It's samples we're doing for the market. For the market.
Here, try this one right here.
Huh?
Tell them what it is.
I didn't make them now.
Try that?
Thanks, dude.
Someone drink the water. I don't think they'll.
What?
Calculate yourself a game.
No, I was sitting outside with a friend, and you hear like sirens go off for the following 15 minutes.
Actually, we have time and it's gone.
Wednesday.
Wow.
9:30, quarter to 10 in the night at night.
And we've got.
Want to try some food samples there,
Want to try
Todd?
some?
Yeah, man.
Here, roll out the.
A little salty.
Fill out the form when
Little
you're all
salty?
done.
Yeah. So what we got here?
And then you're going to sell water for $6 a bottle, right?
Yes, that is. Have the green ketchup there, Cody.
What is this?
I like that.
This is barbecue beef. Wait, you gotta fill out a form, dude.
Oh yeah, he's a man.
Can you dish up some barbecue?
Who's the man?
This gentleman?
What's that?
You want some barbecue beef?
Alrighty.
It's him. What's up? Try the herring. Not bad, dude. Good.
Not bad.
What's up? Kill you, dude.
Is it a little salty?
Seal of approval.
Got a little salt in there.
Yeah.
From what I understand.
Wow. They're just like the mark. Saltier.
Would I sample some of our free food there, man? All right. This is the pickle here.
Stay there. Get your knees out over your toes. Push your knees back over your toes. See how my feet are turned out to the side? Keep your back straight. Push your knees back. Stay there. Back. Stay there. Back. Stay there. Push your knees back. Your arms. And back. And back. So you're going to keep back. And back. And back. Now stretch back, all the way as far as you can go, and then stretch your arms to the mirror and stay there. Stay, stay. Come on, stay. And come down. That's excellent. Wonderful. Hey, guys. Yes, sir. I just want to tell you guys, this was a big joke, right? And if you're going to show us a couple more,
I better get.
what is it?
We're gonna show it to who?
Anything I told you, it's not true.
Show it to who?
Just,
Who you gonna show it to? Whoa, we don't stretch.
it's not true. Don't do that.
Who you showing it to?
They're showing you the passport for him.
Because I'm not American?
It's a week where they don't have school and we do a bunch of different activities.
Oh, hell no. Oh, this
But you're great, you guys.
is so exciting.
Is it gonna be here on campus?
Yeah.
Oh, watching it. When they gonna be showing it?
And you the whole time. I got me spinning with the basketball like I was really doing something.
So you guys, thank you.
Yeah, well, actually, I was just going to ask you guys if you want to help me. I have a meeting I have to go to, and my button fell off my pants. And I don't know how to sew. So, could you guys, sew it on for me?
So you're button onto your pants?
Yeah. Well, it's really important. I can't go into my meeting without my button.
I have a small time for the meeting.
Come on, just give it a try.
Do you have a needle and thread?
I went to the office and they gave me stuff. So, and they said if I could sew it back on for me.
Oh my god. You're the one who sews. I don't know how to sew.
See, I don't know how to
Sorry.
sew either, so that's why I tried earlier, but...
Well, all you have to do, here, I'll show you. I don't really want to do it. You take the needle in, and then you come out, and you just like crisscross. You crisscross. Here, give me a needle. Thread.
I don't know how to thread it either, so that would be...
Can you just perform it for him? Like,
Yeah,
Do it.
it's one of those stunts we have to get on camera. It's like the scavenger hunt, you know? We have to get a girl to sew a button on his pants. Like the MTV kind of deal. You guys watch MTV? What's she doing?
Should I put the thread in the
threading
hole?
it.
You stick it in the hole. Yeah.
Hey.
All right.
Okay.
You can do it.
Just do it. Do it.
Don't stab me, okay?
You have to cut it. Here. I can cut it. Like half it.
Yeah, don't poke.
Was really an undertaking. Thank you all for having such a great sense of humor yourself. Now we're going to open it up for more fun and have questions from the audience. Tyler, do you have the microphone, the portable? Yes, because we're recording this all to go in the library, and we do all of our programs, and we have hundreds of tapes in the library, and so if you don't ask your question on the mic, it won't get recorded, and then people watching it, they don't know what the question was. So if someone, Karen, maybe you can do that, or someone, who has the first question? We'll bring the mic to you. You must have, right here we go with Bill right here, and the lady back here. Raise your hand again, and then she'll come to you. Thank you.
Now, this one's for Oscar. Oscar, you spent some time, kind of the beginning to your end was spent in jail, or you were in prison. Could you kind of explain that?
That is an interesting question because I have never spent any time in jail yet, and I hope to never do so.
That was to the point. Question back here.
Hi, Mr. Twain. I had the privilege of living near the Calaveras County Frog Jump as a youngster, and I used to go to the frog jump, but I never saw any frogs jump. There was so much other going on. But I was read one of your stories about the blue jay that kept putting the acorns in the hole. What was your inspiration? Were you in that area and watching this happen, or?
I saw Jay and thought he told a marvelous story. And as long as the story would tell itself, I was a faithful and interested amanuensis. It was only when the story tried to shift to my mind the task of constructing the conversations and carrying on the adventures that I put it aside. I wasn't about to work that hard. And that was something that I learned in the middle of Tom Sawyer. This story just made a sudden stop, and it wouldn't go on. About page 400 in my manuscript of it. And I knew it wasn't finished, and I couldn't understand. But yes, I just had to let the tank fill up again. It had run dry. You can't make a story out of nothing. And I didn't make the Jay story out of nothing. I made it out of the Jay.
There's a question back there, Karen.
This is also for Mr. Twain. Years after you did, I'm sure, I also lived in Angels Camp, and one year had the honor of seeing the frog jumping contest. I've often wondered, though, where did you imagine that the frog had come from? And did you ever elect to give it a name or two?
A name to the frog? No, I never gave it a name. But it sounds like it has become a tradition that I'm not aware of.
Yes, it's a fantastic tradition every year. The frog had a past, did it, or just a story?
The frog that I knew, it didn't jump. It just kind of lifted its shoulders like a Frenchman.
Next question. Over here, Karen. While you're getting to him, Miss Parker, I have one for you. You're famous for your short poems, and when you appear with others, you tend to read those poems. Would you like to make some comment about why you like reading poems?
Sometimes just with a few words you can get your point across, and it helps the simple-minded to remember what you said.
Are you suggesting that I'm simple-minded?
Oh, not at all, Tony.
Okay, question here.
Yes, for Miss Parker as well. I just wondered if the real Miss Parker was as pretty as you are, but also did you consider yourself a women's libber at the time that you were making a show of something that might come to pass later? Because I too was born before women could vote.
Thank you for the compliment, and yes, Miss Parker thinks she's quite lovely, and yes, she did at the time, but not so much as being a women's libber, but just being an intellectual and very much enjoying the time frame. And actually, I was quite frustrated that it took so long for something so obvious to come about.
Thank you. Next question. Back here.
For each of the panelists, what is your humor? What makes you funny? Or what do you think makes you funny?
I don't think I'm funny at all. I just tell it like it is.
I think in my early stand-up comedy anyway, it was more towards taking actual tools of the trade and show business and blowing them up to gigantic proportions and twisting them around. I think that describes the style.
I think that humor comes from truth, and we learn when we write about humor that the simple truth is rarely simple at all, and often not the truth when we write about it.
know, there are three kinds of stories. Only one difficult kind. The comic story is English, and the witty story is French. But the humorous story is American. And it's strictly a work of art. And the humorist does everything possible to conceal that he knows that there's anything funny about what he's saying at all. Whereas the comic story, the teller of the comic story tells you beforehand that it's the funniest thing you ever heard, and then's the first to laugh when it's finished. And he'll repeat the nub of the story, collect an applause 2 or 3 times. It's a pitiful thing to see.
Next question. Niels, you always have one. Give him the mic. By the way, Mark Twain, no, it was, who was it that was talking about, oh, you were talking about journalists, weren't you? Who was talking about journalists when they got up?
It was Mr. Wilde. That's who I have a question
Yes,
for.
This is a journalist, you know, in the audience.
He looks like a journalist. I won't comment on that one, but Mr. Wilde, your plays always make fun of wealthy people. Do you do that because of your background and association? What causes you to make fun of wealthy people?
Well, they're the behavior that wealthy people exhibit. They can fuss more over a cucumber sandwich than a starving child in the street. And I was raised in a wealthy family and had vacations in country homes and did feel guilty about it. And I think we make light of things that we feel guilty about as well.
Other questions? There's another one back here.
This is for Mr. Martin. Obviously, with your age, you are an old comedian. But it seems that when you're watching comedy now with some of the, at least it appears some of the younger ones, that you can't get by a comedy routine without every other word being something that's somewhat of a 4-letter word. How do you manage to succeed so long without having to dwell on this? And what do you think of this new brand of comedy?
Well, I've always liked to have maybe younger children be able to buy tickets to my show, make more money. Maybe that would be. But really, I think that the use of profanity is more of a speech pattern in today's language. It's instead of saying or people will resort to these words, which it's a style. I guess it's up to us to agree or disagree with it, but I don't personally find too much wrong with it myself, but it's not really my style, you know.
Question there.
This is a question for Mark Twain and for the Wild, or the Oscar, whatever you like to call yourself. Of all the characters you guys have created, which do you two feel are the most humorous and make fun of humans in the most humorous way?
Mr. Weil?
I think in most all of my plays, there is some high class, upper class, so-called social woman who loves to entertain her friends, and I would use their name but with one letter changed, and so it was never very hidden who I was referring to, and I think I enjoyed using those types of characters for humor the most and employed that technique the most?
I suppose boys would be my answer. You know, the boy is the subject sometimes of ridicule, and certainly not a lot of respect. But it was the boy who gave the definition of faith, you know, is believing something that you know ain't true. And of course, it was the Sunday school boy who gave the classic definition of a lie. A lie, he said, is an abomination before the Lord and an ever-present help in time of trouble. A lot of wisdom in boys.
Other questions?
I have a question.
And then also Darcy here has
Okay.
one right here.
I'd like to know from each of you, if you could choose another profession, what it would be and why.
Who wishes to start with that one? Dorothy?
Wow. I very much enjoyed being a writer and a critic. It suited my profession just fine and my personality. I spent my whole lifetime looking for love and getting over broken hearts. So maybe if I were to choose another profession and hope it would suit me this time, it would to be comfortable with who I am and to give and find love in the right ways.
I believe I would choose art. I think I would be an artist because I devoted my life to aesthetics, and artists always found their way into my plays.
Steve Martin?
As I said, I'd probably be a philosophy professor. With comedy, you say absurd things and people are supposed to laugh. With philosophy, you say absurd things and people are supposed to go,
I don't get the distinction. Mark Twain.
Well, I have had many professions in my time. I was a printer for 10 years. And you know, you can't set up acres and acres of type and not know the difference between good literature and bad. Been a riverboat pilot, and I'd give anything to go pilot again if Madam would stand for it, which she won't. I've been a publisher, published President Grant's memoirs, many other things. I was so successful as a publisher that I've been able to declare bankruptcy. I've been a silver miner and a gold miner in my time. Once, for 10 days, I was worth $1 million. I've been a journalist, and I'm quite proud of that. That's the best school in the world to learn about human nature and human ways. But I've always been able to make my living without having to work. Writing matter for magazines and books is just billiards to me. I wouldn't have done it if it was work. Once I was desperate for money and thought of becoming a preacher. But that was in those innocent days when it never occurred to me that a preacher could be damned. It looked like safe work. But of all the things I've done, the finest is piloting a steamboat on the Mississippi River. The riverboat pilot is the only entirely free human being in the world, and nobody gives him an order, not even the captain.
Darcy?
This is for Oscar Wilde. Having just read The Importance of Being Earnest, I had a question, and I'm just wondering what, in your mind, is the importance of being earnest?
Well, of course, it is a play on words, a pun, and the characters in the play did were so absurdly written and created that to try to take some sort of moral from Ernest or from his words and behavior in the play would somewhat betray the humor in it and the play on the words.
There's a question back here. What is amazing is these characters, they don't know what you're going to ask, and they're ready, aren't they?
This is for Mr. Martin. All your movies, the characters you portray, I've noticed have always made fun of a certain aspect of the human character. And of all the movies I've seen, I appreciate all the characters that you've played. In all your movies, what's your favorite character that you've played and why?
Well, probably the favorite movie I've ever made was Pennies from Heaven. It was made in '81. It was very heartfelt and unique and special, which is probably why it flopped. But that was definitely my favorite movies, Pennies from Heaven.
Other questions? Up here, Kieran? This nice person's been here every day, haven't you? We've had a lot of you been here all week.
This is for Steve Martin. Can you say a little bit about what's going on in your personal life at the present time? We all saw you last week on the Oscars, and I believe from what I saw in a biography of you that I don't believe you're in a relationship at the present time. Is that true?
No, it's not. I'm not in a relationship. I was married one time to Victoria Tennant, 86 to 94, but I try not to make the same mistake twice. I did go around with Anne Heche for a little while, and look what happened to her. So.
I don't think he wants to say anything else. Like Thomas Jefferson, on Monday, someone asked him about his personal life, and he said to her, "It's none of your business."
Yeah, this would be for Mark Twain. I heard that you had been in North Idaho once, I believe Mullen. I'm not sure where. Is there any truth to that?
North Idaho?
He didn't say IOWA.
No.
Actually, he's been here 3 times. I can't resist it. They put me in this mood. And when I'm with my friends at dinner or something, we get relaxed like this. I'm getting relaxed because the week's about to end. And I just think they're all just really, really wonderful. But I was with the president of this college, and he's introduced me to the president of the college. And real seriously, I said to the other president, we have a special thing at North Idaho College. We talk with the dead. We've talked now with over 200 people who are dead in the last 6 years, and you should have seen our president's face. And we sent an email to the head of a dean of a college, Alan and I did in Spokane, and we said we're going to start a new course at North Idaho College called Social Science 101, Speaking with the Dead. So see, we have a lot of them here. I'm going to ask, do you have a question? Okay. I'm going to ask, just to show you the technique that this gentleman uses, Mark Twain, I'm going to give him about 3 words, and he's going to say something about those words. I did that on TV with him today, and then we'll, after that, break out of character, because I want you to know these really special people and how incredibly talented they are. Mark Twain, I'll say a word, and you give me a reaction. Marriage.
My marriage has been a very successful one. I married above my station in life, and my wife married below hers.
Heaven. It's heaven versus
Heaven.
hell.
Oh, heaven.
Yeah.
Heaven, yes. Well, I have traveled everywhere in the world, just about, and I have no desire to travel any more. I've not seen heaven or hell, and I have almost no interest in one of those places.
Death.
It is strange to hear people complain how hard it is that we have to die. This from people who've had to live.
Well, I don't think we're going to beat that one. Maybe that's a good time to stop. You are a wonderful audience, and it really helps those who have come to visit with us because you are wonderful. Your reactions, it's been so good. Now let me introduce the real individuals. For those scholars who teach about Chautauqua, they say it's very important to break character at the end. And I'm going to start over here on this end with a colleague, a faculty member, a really good friend. And when I asked her to do this, she said to me, "But I'm serious, I'm not a funny person." And I checked with other faculty, and they didn't agree with her. They think she's very funny. She's a highly gifted individual, and she's, like myself, a Southerner. She comes from Texas. Would you welcome, and each of you, I'd like for you to say why you chose this character and what it's meant to you. I particularly have been inspired over the last 6 years and how individuals told me that it's some way that changed their life to play a character. And by the way, your appreciation I know is great because they work on this for about 6 months. And they do an extensive amount of, some read many books and articles or watch films. And from the natural sciences, our good friend, Renee Cooper.
Hi, thank you. I teach microbiology and nutrition here at NIC, and I picked Dorothy Parker because Tony asked me to. She was quite an interesting character to learn about and to research. Had a lot of frustrations in her life. She always found it that quite surprised when people thought she was humorous because she would just be telling things like they were and talking about some social situations that were actually quite sad. And she just had this, maybe it was the whiskey, but this ability to come up with little lines that were so quotable. And many of you have read her in Reader's Digest. She's often in the quotable quotes, and a lot of people know her famous one-liners. But as you get to looking into them, they're really serious. There's a lot of substance there. There's a lot of depth there. She lived in an incredible period as our culture was changing, and all the changes and those changes also uproot people a little bit. You know, you don't come into a decade knowing exactly who you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to be, and you kind of have to grow and go with the times. And if you've not read her, pick up some of her stuff. There's a lot of short stories there with a lot of depth, and I think you'll enjoy her a lot. Thanks.
And how has it influenced you?
I've had to read more about death and taxes than I ever want to think about. So that was interesting. Being raised from a mom that was real strong-willed. I'm not a female that has a trouble saying no, except to Tony. And so it was real interesting, a lot of the things and the way she would put we have a lot of talk show hosts that empower women and teach them to grow in their spirit, et cetera. And she was a pioneer in that time, so it was nice to see that.
Thank you very much. Our next individual is a student here, and as I indicated, I have him in class. He also is in theater. One thing I like about it, when one of the students perform in theater, the other theater students come. They're here tonight. I just wish the political science students would do like that and always support their peers the same way. You really, really do support one another. He really, truly is shy in class. I don't think he's ever said anything in class. He's a good student, and he does grin all the time. But we're really grateful. In fact, he did something that I was late getting a request to him, and he's not had so much time to prepare, and I thought he was fantastic. Let's welcome Dan Thompson.
Well, when Tony offered to have me be in the popcorn forum, he suggested Steve Martin because someone was already going to do it, was going to back out. But he told me that I could change it if I wanted to. But I looked into Steve Martin, and he really is just a brilliant person. I mean, he's so much more than just a comedian. You know, he's also a very intelligent person. I mean, he wrote, I forgot to say it, but he wrote a play in '93 called Picasso at the Lapina Gil. And it's just I thought it was a wonderful play. In it, it's about Albert Einstein and Picasso meeting at the turn of the century in a bar. And it was just like, you had to understand one of the greatest artists and one of the greatest scientific minds to write that play. And I think that just shows such intelligence. And how has it changed my life? Is a nice. Well, I'm not sure how much it's changed my life, really.
I do, right there. You just gave it away.
I know a lot more about Steve Martin, I guess.
Well, Dan, I predict it changed your life when I ask you a question on Monday morning. Dan's great. He'll do great. He's going to do great in theater. I apologize for trying to be humorous, but they've got me going. Then next we have another colleague. He works in admissions. He's in charge of the scholarships on campus. He's assisted with recruiting, and a very good human being and an intellect. He is really a great admirer of Joseph Campbell, and he has done him in the Popcorn Forum. And he's been with us a number of years and is a real attribute to our campus. And I have to also personally thank him because he's in charge of the transportation committee that gets our people at the airport, so they're here for performing. Let's welcome North Idaho College employee John Jensen.
I've been waiting for that out-of-character thing to happen for about 90 minutes. Cutting the circulation off on the wig and the hat there. Well, let's see why I chose the character. Is that starting? As Tony said, I did Joseph Campbell a couple years in this, and it was just it's a real treat to do this because it kind of forces you to get some real in-depth research going. And I was telling George on the way from the airport today, I said, it's just the research is the fun part for me. This part's the agonizing part. But just learning it, just forcing yourself to kind of learn that and dig down into a person, it has been really exciting, and no matter who you do. But Oscar Wilde, I just read his plays and whatnot in college and high school, and just used to remember laughing out loud. And I thought, how a guy 150 years ago writing things, and somebody in 1980 is laughing out loud at it, and I just think that's pretty amazing. And I will just say one thing to these people that were asking questions, Bill, and a drama student. Were you one of the? No. But we are kind of asked to pick a year when we are up here, and thus the answer to I haven't been to prison yet. And according to the year I chose to portray this character in, but he did go to prison for 2 years and did hard labor. He had an affair with a man named Lord Alfred Douglas, and sued that man's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, for the famous Queensberry rules about fighting, and got countersued, lost the first one. I mean, and then was put in jail for being gay in 1890 or something like that in Ireland. And so that's how his life ended. Yeah, he died a couple years after that. And then your question over here, I just in most of the writings that I read of his, it seemed like he would be someone who wouldn't give you a real easy answer. He seemed like someone who would kind of toy with you and make you, and say kind of some double speak and make you figure it out yourself, kind of throw you in a way. So you kind of just pick those ways to respond, and I don't think he would give a real direct, easy answer to anybody.
And John, I want to say to you that the one thing I admire that I could never do is how you can develop an accent like that. We've had several of our characters do that, and that's another talent, part of the role, playing the role.
I wasn't sure till 5 till 7 if I was going to even try that. So that wasn't really developed too much.
Yeah.
But I just say thanks to Tony, though. These things really do kind of change you. You get a great reward from doing it, and it's just a great thing for the community to be able to do.
All of you are so special. The hours they put in, and they get no pay for doing that. It's just really, really wonderful. But they are recorded on tape in the library, and they'll be known in history. Our last guest is a friend from going back, and along with Clay Jenkinson, he's probably the next, he and Clay are the best known Chautauqua performers in the country. He's been instrumental in the Chautauqua performances in the Midwest for years. He is the retired professor, a distinguished professor at the University of North Dakota, where he taught philosophy and religion. He's been with us 3 times. He does other characters also and has here. A really kind man. My secretary said about him today that she found him to be so gentle and such a very, very cooperative, kind man. And I said, you have really figured him out. And that's the first time she had met him. And he's always available. And he and Clay Jenkinson have worked a lot together. Again, give an Idaho welcome to someone who said he'd never been here before, Dr. George Freen.
Tony, I guess I do this for the same reason you do it. It's a good way to teach, painless. And also, I think it does set a good example about how to read. At least I read differently than I used to. Mm-hmm. If you read, to quote something, Dorothy Parker said this and that, that's one thing. But if you read and have to say, I thought, I said, you read with a different kind of sympathy for the writer. And the critical voice, which we've all learned to develop in the humanities, is sometimes overpowers the sympathetic voice. And reading with both of those in mind, I think it's a good learning experience. And I always learn from audiences. And I wasn't sure about the question about the name for the frog. Daniel Webster is the name in the story. But I wasn't sure whether you were asking, did Twain invent that name, or was that in the story as he heard it? And as I was flipping through the index cards in my mind, nothing would come up for certain. So, and I still don't know whether or not that was a Twain addition to the story that he heard it from Jim Gillis' brother in Angel Camp or not. Do you know?
No, I just had an opportunity to be involved with the people there.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my frog never had a name, and I always wanted to know where the name came from. Why that?
Yes. Yes. Some years ago in a little town in Kansas, when Twain was doing a program for children, they thought they'd have a frog jumping contest, and the kids were going to be given a frog, or they could bring one. And all but one would just use the one they were assigned. But this one kid brought a big bullfrog, and all during the performance, making noises. And the frogs they passed out were small little things. That bullfrog took off and leaped within about 3 inches of the goal post in the first leap, and didn't go from then on. So that has become almost a classical cultural program around many places, but certainly where you saw it.
Thank you, George. George said something that I talk to every single performer, and we have between 30 and 40 a year, and so for 6 years now we've had about 6 times 30 or 6 times 40, and of course some people have repeated it each year, but almost everyone has told me the same thing, that in preparing for a character, I was thinking of an attorney the other day that had done one, and he said he reads like 5 books a week. And he said, but when I started doing reading for a character, it's totally different than just reading for understanding or pleasure. The other thing Clay Jenkinson shared with me is he said if he was president of a university or college, what he would do if he had the power to do so, he would require that every class would be taught in the Chautauqua format. And what I get from the audience is, and I haven't talked to you, most of you, but people come up to me every year and they say that learning becomes so much easier in this format and your retaining ability is so much higher. And then the lady said to me today, she said, and it also has got, I'm so fascinated with some of these characters, I'm going to go read a lot more now about them. So let me share a personal story with you as we close, 2 of them actually. I had a friend that was a great friend, Tom Emerson. He was on the board of trustees. He was a banker in Coeur d'Alene, and he wrote several books, and he was a pilot, and he and his wife were great contributors to this community, and they're both deceased now. And he took me to lunch just a few weeks before he died, and I was thinking about that while you were talking about this. He looked across and he grinned at me and he said, I'm on to you. I know why you're doing the popcorn forum. I know exactly what you're up to. You're trying to get people to think. And I said, I plead guilty. For 31 years, you have been so kind to come, and last year 6,000 people came, and this year it's going to be a smaller number, but it's going to be between 3,500 and 4,000 for the 6 days. And we will end tomorrow with a great performance by Mark Twain at 11 o'clock and a panel here at 1. And then our bookends this year have been a concert on Sunday night with our wonderful Terry Jones doing the jazz concert banquet on Friday night. And we had a total of 544 seats. That's all we can get in the Coeur d'Alene Inn, not the resort. And every single seat sold. So it'll be a great celebration with Morris D as the keynote speaker. So learning and celebrating at the same time. But I do want to end on a personal note because I admire you so much, what you've done. And when John said that this is the most difficult part is performing, I could not agree more. I give lots of speeches, but I say what I want to say, or I have it written. And you who are in theater, you know, you have to memorize lines and actually remember them on stage. That is not possible for me. When I was 8 or 10 years old in North Carolina, I was asked to be in a play, and like you, I've been having trouble memorizing my lines. And I had the opening line, and when the curtains opened and I looked out and it was a full house, I got total and complete stage fright. I didn't know my name. I never remembered a line during the entire play. The director stood behind the curtain, and she would read a line, and I'd repeat it. I ruined that play, and I knew that. I was only 8 or 10. But when I came off stage, my aunt said to me, she was a very candid person, like some of you. Kindness and compassion was not her number one quality. And she said to me, as this little boy, Tony, you ruined that play. And I have never been in another one. So that's why I admire you, among other things. Let's thank him one more time, and we'll see you tomorrow.